I started off a little blindly, like I just didn't understand it. That's why I wanted to do this series on the podcast, kind of telling the behind the scenes of the making of the cookbook, because even I, going into it, I didn't understand what goes into making a cookbook. So I figured a lot of folks, even people who buy cookbooks, wouldn't know and be interested to hear about it.
This is The Zest. Citrus, seafood, Spanish flavor, and Southern charm. The Zest celebrates cuisine and community in the Sunshine State. I'm Chandler Balcom, filling in for Dalia Colon, who has currently lost her voice. This week on the podcast, the Pastabilities. Before we jump into today's show, we want to remind you that Dalia's first cookbook, the Florida Vegetarian Cookbook, is out now. And you have a chance to win a copy. For details, follow us on Facebook or Instagram at The Zest Podcast. The giveaway runs through Tuesday, March 26, 2024. And speaking of cookbooks, today we'll hear from Dan Pashman, host of the popular food podcast, The Sporkful. Dan chatted with Dalia back when she had her voice about his new cookbook, Anything's Pastable, 81 inventive pasta recipes for saucy people. Dan is also heading out on a book tour, which swings through Florida on March 28th. He'll be in Miami for a conversation with journalist Carlos Frias. Dan spoke with Dalia from his recording studio in New York about the good, bad, and ugly of writing a cookbook, his favorite outside-the-box pasta recipe, and what he looks forward to eating when he visits Florida.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not a chef, and I've never written recipes professionally, or even I haven't really written even amateur recipes. And so, yeah, sure, I've been hosting a food podcast for 14 years. I talk about food a lot. I think a lot about eating, but I'm not a chef, and recipe testing and development has never been something that I've done. And, I'm sure some people don't perceive me this way, but I still feel like an outsider in the world of food because of my lack of professional training.
So I totally get where you're coming from, and not to make it about me, but I did recently write the Florida Vegetarian Cookbook, and I had the same thought process even when the publisher approached me. What do I know about writing a cookbook? And then during the process, I found this interesting on some of the episodes where you recounted the journey of writing the cookbook. I started to hate it and doubt myself even more. Can you relate to that at all? Was it all like sunshine and roses?
No, definitely not. Right. I mean, I started off a little blindly, like I just didn't understand it. That's why I wanted to do this series on the podcast, kind of telling the behind the scenes of the making of the cookbook, because even I, going into it, I didn't understand what goes into making a cookbook. So I figured a lot of folks, even people who buy cookbooks, wouldn't know and be interested to hear about it. I'm going to hire recipe developers to work with me, and they're going to be, I'll make sure I hire really awesome, talented folks, which I did. I just figured, well, they'll help. But it's still like, I still needed to and wanted to cook every single recipe, and it's still up to me to make decisions at the end of the day. And I've been in media creative fields for 20 plus years. I've made a lot of different things. I've written books and articles and made TV and videos and podcasts and radio and live things. I have never in my 20 plus year career worked on anything that required this many decisions. There are so many decisions, and it is overwhelming. And anytime you have to make so many decisions, you're going to start to question yourself. Am I making the right decisions or not? There are so many details to consider, and the more decisions I had to make, the more I sort of got worn down by them, and the more I started questioning whether I was the right person to be making them at all.
Isn't that crazy? You think that you would feel like more legit, and you just end up realizing how much you don't know.
Right. I mean, look, by the end of the process, I did feel more legit. After a year plus of testing dozens and dozens of recipes and working with recipe developers and editors and getting feedback from all different folks, as the process went on, I started making more changes to the recipes myself, or going back to a recipe developer and saying, I think I know this is great, but I have one issue and I think I figured out how to fix it, which is not something I would have done at the beginning. At the beginning, I would have been like, what do I do? It's not working, And towards the end, I was like, I think I figured it out, which was, that was very gratifying, but it took me a long time to get there.
Sure. And you know that the 81 pasta recipes in the book are the best of the best. They've been tested over and over again. So talk to me about some of the more unexpected, they're all unexpected, recipes in the book.
And that's really the idea of the book, is that they should all be unexpected. I mean, this is a cookbook full of pasta dishes, pasta sauces, pasta preparations. There's no recipe in this book for tomato sauce. There's no recipe for classic meat sauce. There's no traditional lasagna. There's no traditional basic mac and cheese. I love those things, but I just feel like the world doesn't need another recipe for them. I really, when I invented this new shape of pasta called cascatelli. When it went viral, everyone was sending me photos of what they're making with it, which was amazing and very exciting, but also a little disappointing because so many of the photos I got were just pasta with a tomato sauce glopped on top.
Right, just a different shape of pasta.
Right, it was tomato sauce, meat sauce, mac and cheese. I mean, a couple party animals made pesto.
Ooh.
That was really it. And that was what gave me the idea for this cookbook. I want to show people that there's so much more that they can and should be putting on pasta. And then I was like, and how can I push the boundaries? So everything from kimchi carbonara, cacio e pepe with chili crisp and Sichuan peppercorns. A lot of it is like taking an Italian dish and just kind of tweaking it. So like there's Italian wedding soup. It's a soup with like Italian sausage and meatballs and stuff, but we did Mexican wedding soup and we did turkey albondigas with a whole bunch of different spices and chipotle peppers. And it's the same kind of concept. We did a quinoa bolognese. So look, any kind of ground meat dish can be adapted into a meat sauce. So let's look at other cuisines who have delicious ground meat sauces and see how we can adapt these into pasta sauces.
That's so fun. And we do have the kimchi recipe, the kimchi pasta recipe on our website, thezestpodcast.com.
And I should say, shout out to Irene Yu, the recipe developer on that one. I mean, that really was her baby. And, I saw that she was working something like that. I said, I need to collaborate with her because this is exactly the kind of thing I want in my cookbook. And it's incredible. There's actually kimchi carbonara in the book and kimchi alla gricia. So gricia is like carbonara, but without eggs. And they're both amazing. They're kind of different. But, when you saute the kimchi in the pan, it mellows the spice a little bit. It reduces the acidity and crunch a little bit, but doesn't take it away entirely. When you add that in, it just kind of cuts through the richness of the carbonara. It gives you a little spice. It gives you crunch. It gives you acidity. It's kind of like, adding something it's like adding hot sauce to a bacon, egg, and cheese, and it is really good.
Oh man, I haven't had lunch yet. I love what you're doing, not only with the recipes, but I feel like this cookbook also gives us all permission to break the rules, because I've definitely had times when I thought, I want to make beans and rice, but I don't have any rice, so maybe I'll do beans and pasta. But can I do that? Do I need like a permission slip signed by someone to do that?
Right.
I feel like this book is everyone's permission slip.
I hope so. I hope that's true. But it is a balance because, certainly working with a wide range of cuisines, and I wanted to take care to be thoughtful about that and give credit where it's due and work with recipe developers who have expertise in different cuisines. I wanted to be thoughtful and intentional and not just glopping any kind of trendy ingredient on top of pasta. That being said, I think that I certainly cook with a much wider range of ingredients today than I grew up eating. I think that's true for a lot of Americans. And so it's a natural evolution of cuisine that when you have certain ingredients in your kitchen, you're cooking with them. At a certain point, someday, you're going to need to throw something together and you're not going to have rice. Like you say, you're going to want rice and beans, you don't have rice. So you scrounge, and oftentimes that's when people end up coming up with things. And so the ingredients in this cookbook, regardless of what cuisine they're coming from, are all ingredients that I cook with and that I eat and that I love. And so to me, it felt like sort of a natural extension of the experimentation that home cooks do all the time.
That's such a good point. And for this book, you pulled out all the stops. You went to Italy. You learned from the best. You learned the rules so you could decide which ones you wanted to break. A lot of people listening have an idea for their own cookbook, maybe family recipes or just things they've come up with over the years. What advice would you give that person who doesn't have a team of recipe testers or the ability to travel and research the recipes? What would be the first step?
I mean, the first step would be start writing down the recipes. And if your goal is to turn it into a book, I would just think first, like, what sets this apart? What is the unique perspective of this book? I had pitched some book concepts before this one that nobody was interested in. But when it got connected to the story of cascatelli and it felt like a logical progression, like, this guy created this pasta, he has a unique perspective on pasta, and that experience led him to this feeling that there was a need for this cookbook. And so that was a guiding principle. And then it was kind of like, okay, I had a thesis statement from the beginning, which is the idea that there's a lot more things that you can and should be putting on your pasta. So with that as a mission and a sort of a thesis statement, that was kind of my guiding principle. So I think, think about what is the distinct perspective here and what do you have to add that other people maybe haven't done. And then once you get past that, you just have to be true to yourself. At a certain point, I got over the imposter syndrome, and I got over it in part by just being like, you know what? I'm just going to do what I like because this is my cookbook, and I'm going to, like, it's not necessarily, it's not always a right or wrong, but you just have to be true to yourself and realize that whatever you come up with is not going to be for everyone.
Yeah. And you realize writing a cookbook that other cookbook authors are just humans who had an idea.
Right. Well, I mean, I saw Ina Garten on 60 Minutes, and she was like, I stress about every recipe. And I'm like, Ina? So it made me feel better. But, I think that any person who works in a creative field, you're always going to try to push yourself to do better. You're going to push yourself to continue to improve, and you're going to challenge yourself to do things you're not sure you can do. And that's scary. So this cookbook at times felt scary, but at the end, I'm glad that I did it, and I'm proud of it. If I had known when I set out how hard it would be and also how ill-prepared I was at the beginning, I might not have done it. So in some ways, it's good to not realize how unprepared you are for something.
For sure. It's like, just get on the road and it's going to be windy and twisty and you're too far from home to go back. So you might as well just keep going.
Yeah. Sometimes it's good to not know what you have in store for yourself.
100%. Okay, I have so many pasta questions for you. It's great to make these wonderful recipes from the book. What about the nights when we just my son has soccer practice, we got homework, I just gotta throw something together and all I have is like a jar of sauce and some pre-made dried pasta. Are there things I can do to elevate that?
For sure. Well, look, first of all, as I said, there's no recipe for tomato sauce in this cookbook. I don't think the world needs it. And partly why you don't need it is not only are there a lot of recipes out there already for tomato sauce, but there's so many great jarred tomato sauces available now. Why, unless it's something that really brings you joy, why are you making tomato sauce from scratch? Don't do it. Buy a good jarred tomato sauce. And if you want to take it to the next level, I have in the cookbook a jarred tomato sauce decision tree.
Of course you
do. So you start off with a jar of tomato sauce, and this gives you all different options. If you want to make it heartier, spicier, add texture, add vegetables, make it creamier, make it, what kind of spice, all different kinds of things that you can add to it to turn it into a different kind of sauce just by opening a jar and adding a few things. That was a fun one to test, too. I literally made like a pound of plain pasta, and then I had like a row of bowls of different kinds of Dr. Tomato sauces. So my kids and I could just stab one piece of pasta and then run it through the bowl of sauce and taste that sauce. So it's tomato sauce with a bit of fish sauce, tomato sauce with chili crisp, this or that. And that's a fun way to have a party.
Oh, for sure. Do you have a favorite jarred sauce?
Probably my favorites. I love Carbone. I don't know if you have that in Florida yet. Maybe it's more of a New York area thing. Rayo's is very good. They're getting more and more distribution. Mm-hmm. Victoria, I like. Rusticella d'Abruzzo is a lesser-known one. They also make great pasta. But really, I just sort of feel like get whatever jarred tomato sauce tastes good to you. I don't think there's a right or wrong, other than I have a couple of basic rules for buying jarred tomato sauce. And one is that the first ingredient should be tomatoes. Now, it may be written as oven-roasted tomatoes, San Marzano tomatoes, plum tomatoes, blah, 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 as long as it's tomatoes and not tomato puree. Tomato puree is not terrible, but it's kind of like the equivalent of like juice from concentrate. Tomato puree is like concentrated tomatoes and often with water and even sugar added.
It's like tomato product.
Right. So you want the first ingredient to be tomatoes. My second rule is that there should be no sugar added. And that's not for health reasons. It's because if the manufacturer's using good tomatoes, they won't need to add sugar. Beyond those two rules, I say get whatever tomato sauce makes you happy.
Oh, that's good. I mean, you've been on this whole journey, but when you think about, your ultimate comfort food, like what's the pasta you grew up eating? And do you still enjoy just a really simple bowl of pasta?
I don't have a distinct memory of specific pasta dish being sort of central in my house. We certainly ate pasta. It was pretty basic. It was like mostly like ziti, penne, spaghetti, tomato sauce. Like a lot of people, I do absolutely still enjoy a very basic, plain old bowl. I had one just the other day. I had spaghetti with olive oil and grated Parmesan, and it was phenomenal. And there's nothing wrong with that. I just feel like the world doesn't need that recipe in a cookbook. I love all pasta, especially if you're buying, if you buy pretty good quality pasta and cook it correctly, you really can't go wrong.
So true. Okay, I guess I do have a few more pasta questions.
Okay.
Are we ever done thinking about pasta?
Never.
I published on social media that I would be chatting with you. You've got a lot of fans. And Doris Trong wants to know, are you done designing pastas or are you just getting started?
Oh, well, I mean, I will mention that after Cascatelli came out, I collaborated with Sfolini, who are the artisanal pasta makers who make the original Cascatelli, and we launched 2 other shapes, which I did not invent, but they're very obscure Italian shapes that are difficult or impossible to find in the U.S. One is called Quattratini, and one is called Vesuvio. And those are featured in the cookbook too, and I love those also. You can order them online from Sfolini. They're also at the Fresh Market nationwide, and I know there's a lot of fresh markets in Florida, and so folks can grab them there. Beyond that, I'm not actively working on something. There's a few sort of half-baked ideas in the back of my head, but I don't know that there'll be another pasta shape. It's possible, but I kind of feel like, now I'm doing the cookbook, and, I think maybe next I'd rather design a new shape of tortilla chips.
Ooh, I like the way you
If
think.
there's any tortilla chip companies out there, call me.
Yeah. Slide into his DMs.
Yes.
So you've got these 81 recipes that are in the cookbook and probably some that, fell to the wayside. After you completed the book, was your mind still going? Like, have you thought of more?
Yeah, I mean, even before the book was totally done, I had already started a Google Doc with recipes for the next cookbook.
Oh, I love that. I wanted to ask, but I'm like, is that like asking, when are you having another baby when the first baby's not even sleeping through the night?
Right. I mean, I don't have any specific plans for a next cookbook, but I've been working in creative fields for a long time. When you work in a creative field, as you know, you're always on the lookout for ideas. And if you've been doing it for a long time, you're kind of conditioned to see them and identify them and write them down as much as you can.
Yes, you always have a Google Doc.
Right, and they may go nowhere, but yeah, I was certainly doing that. I mean, the thing that's also happened is sort of like then the book ended, and then I started cooking, like the book was finished, and then I started still cooking some of the recipes for my kids and whatever, and then of course I'm still tinkering. I'm like, maybe there should have been one more egg in here, like whatever, that never ends. I think that process, from talking to other cookbook authors, I think that every cookbook author publishes a recipe and immediately changes it after that.
Yes. And so when someone asks you about these recipes that you worked on 2 or 3 years ago, are you almost like, that's like reading my journals from 7th grade. Like I've evolved.
It is, because it's like we have one crawfish carbonara with Cascatelli, like a Cajun crawfish carbonara, and then there's the kimchi carbonara. So there's the 2 carbonaras in the book. There's no traditional basic carbonara. And in the Cajun crawfish carbonara, there's extra egg yolks, but that's not in the kimchi carbonara. And then when I was making the kimchi carbonara recently, I added an extra egg yolk, and I was like, I wonder if this will be good. And it was amazing. And I was like, So anyway, tip out there, add an extra egg yolk when you make the kimchi carbonara.
More is more. I love that. Okay. You are coming to Florida, which is why we're chatting today. On
Can't
March
wait.
28th, you'll be at Sanctuary of the Arts in Miami with James Beard Award winner, host of WLRN's Sundial, and former Zest guest and friend of the pod, Carlos Frias. That's going to be amazing, and tickets are available at sporkful.com/tour. What can we expect at the live show?
Well, I mean, Carlos is an old friend of mine as well. I'm really excited to be joining him on stage. I'm sure we'll have questions about pasta. There'll be opportunities for folks to ask questions, and then there'll be a book signing afterwards. So if you want to grab the book and get it personalized, get it signed, I'll be happy to hang out and do that. I think it's going to be funny. It's a little bit funny for me because I'm sort of like turning over the reins of my own podcast to other folks, and then they're going to ask me questions. So I'm not quite sure how that's going to play out. I'm sure it'll be fun, and that's sort of the fun of seeing a live podcast taping, I think.
Ooh, yeah. And it is a little awkward to be answering the questions when you're used to asking the questions.
That's right.
Okay, Autumn Sanders had a question. It's the meal of a lifetime. Who's making the appetizer and what is it? Who's making the main? Who's making the dessert? Just give us the fantasy.
See, it's so interesting that her question is who's making it, as opposed to what are they making?
I think she wants both.
Okay, I can give you both, but I would just say that, like, I'm not the most knowledgeable sort of like chef person, and so I feel like I have a relatively limited range of possibilities for who could be making it.
But maybe it's your mom.
Oh, I
or
see.
your wife or
Right.
the guy down the street.
Right. I mean, I would say it's definitely going to involve homemade flour tortillas, like flour tortillas made from scratch, because that's probably my all-time favorite food. I mean,
Wait, how do you eat them? They're so good, and they will spoil the store-bought ones forever for you.
Right. No, I mean, we have store-bought ones in our house that I know they're not the same, but you microwave them and they're okay. I will put anything in a flour tortilla. Leftovers, I mean, there's almost nothing you can't wrap in a flour tortilla and have it be delicious. So I'll make quesadillas and burritos and things, but I'll also just like egg and cheese for breakfast for the kids. Often I have leftover roast broccoli, and I'll like microwave the flour tortilla with some mozzarella cheese and roast broccoli and chili crisp. That's a great lunch.
It sounds like we need chili crisp in the house because you've mentioned it a few times, like it's a staple.
There are multiple jars of chili crisp in my refrigerator at all times.
Noted.
Yeah.
Okay, so who's making the tortillas?
Ooh.
Or is it you?
It's going to be a very old Mexican lady, like an abuela.
It's going to be my neighbor across the street.
Yes, that's right. Right.
It's going to be Alma. She's making them.
It's not going to be somebody who you've read about in the like top chefs in Food and Wine.
No.
It's going to be a lady who's done it 100 million times before.
If she has an Instagram account, she's
out.
not the one.
That's right.
She's voted off the island.
Exactly right. That's exactly right. And then I guess, I mean, look, there's a million things that I love. I love Mike Solomonov, a Philly-based chef who does a lot of Israeli cooking, and I just love shawarma, which is another thing that gets wrapped in, I mean, not typically a flour tortilla, but when I cook them at home, I'll often do it with a flour tortilla because I think the store-bought flour tortillas are better than store-bought pitas.
That's fair.
So, like, anything he makes, he does a tahini milkshake. It's like a non-dairy milkshake.
We had him on the podcast a few years ago.
Oh, and the espresso tahini milkshake with like these crumbled cookies on top, and then you order it with extra cookies. Insane.
I don't even know where we are. Autumn, I'm sorry. Is this an appetizer?
I'm rambling.
This is your last meal.
Yeah, that's right.
You've got
It's
a
just
tortilla.
Flour tortillas and tahini
and a
milkshakes.
tahini milkshake.
Yeah.
Okay, that's the dessert, I guess.
Yeah. No, shawarma. Shawarma was my entree.
Okay, that's fair. Is there a drink? Are you a big drink guy?
I mean, I love a beverage. Probably there would be like some really nice tequila.
Okay.
Like, you ever had like Clase Azul tequila? Mm-hmm. It tastes like candy. It's not cheap, but it's, I mean, this is my last meal. I'm not saving my money for anything. Yeah.
No.
Just that with like 1 or 2 ice cubes and a big squeeze of lime juice. Phenomenal.
That's it. Wow. Okay, I'm getting a little full, like a little carb headache just hearing that. So I'm going to let you go in a minute, but I'm going to give the last question to Janet Keeler. She said you launched Sporkful in 2010, which is amazing. Like we launched this podcast in 2019. And there have been so many more. So 2010, You're the OG, way to be ahead of the curve. What do you think is the state of food podcasts? Is there anything that hasn't been done?
There are always things that haven't been done. Human beings will always create new things. And I don't know exactly what the next thing will be, but spoken word audio is the oldest form of media. All right, people have been sharing stories by talking to each other pretty much since the dawn of time. Maybe the distribution channel changes and the mechanism changes, but the root type of expression doesn't change. And so there's always going to be people telling stories to each other, and there are always going to be human beings coming up with new ideas. And I think that food podcasting is always going to be changing and evolving. We just launched a new food podcast on the Sporkful called Deep Dish, hosted by Sola and Ham El-Waili, that tells the surprising stories behind some dishes. And Sola and Ham are great. So that's something new we're trying out. People can listen to it in the Sporkful feed. My friends Kenji Lopez-Alt and Deb Harriman just are about to launch a new food podcast. So as an old-time audio person, I think that it's exciting, and I'm confident that there will always be food podcasts.
Well, I'm happy to hear that.
Yeah,
Damn,
me too.
This was so much fun. Yes, job security for both of us.
Yeah, right, exactly.
Oh, wow. This was so much fun. Everyone needs to pick up your book, Anything's Pastable. And if you haven't already, be sure to follow The Sporkful and hopefully The Zest if you haven't already, wherever you get your podcasts. And we'll see you on March 28th in Miami.
I'll be there. Hope to see you there.
Awesome. Thank you so much. I'm going to go get some chili sauce. Chili crisp.
Yeah,
crisp. That's
do
what
it.
it is.
All right, thanks,
Thank you.
Dalia.
This was so much fun.
And and that was Dan Pashman, host of the Sporkful podcast and author of Anything's Possible. Dan shared his recipe for kimchi carbonara, and you can find that on our website, thezestpodcast.com. I'm Chandler Balcom, filling in for Dalia Colon, who produces The Zest with Andrew Lucas and Alexandria Abran. The Zest is a production of WUSF, copyright 2024, part of the NPR network.